Hey there, welcome to week 5 of the way. This is our fifth and final week in the classroom. So we're going to wrap everything up. Let's kind of go over what we're doing today. So we are be creating the classroom culture, talking about setting up your systems, your behavior, building relationships, and then the implementation of everything, creating a classroom success plan, having an individualized production plan, and wrap up and reflection with everything we've done. I am super excited about this one. I've been excited about all of them. I love all of them, honestly. Um, this one I kind of I love and hate at the same time. I hate that we're wrapping it up, but one of the things that I love about this is actually thinking about your classroom and developing a classroom culture. So we're going to be thinking about that. So let's do a little review of where we've come from and how far you've come in all of this. This is huge. Like you have gone through all 4 weeks and implemented so many changes. You are a select few teachers who have gone beyond ordinary to be extraordinary. And that's the choice that you made, is not to have an ordinary teaching life, but to have an extraordinary one. That's the choice I made a long time ago, that I didn't want to be one of those burned out teachers. And so I made all those changes and learned and grew. And I was so determined to not to be unhappy. And that's what you're doing too. I'm not going to be burned out. I'm not going to be an unhappy person. I'm not going to be one of those statistics. I want to be a happy, extraordinary person. And you are too. So, week 1, we talked about neurohacking balance. So, talking about those things that your brain needs. Our brains are not meant for 2018. And so, we need a little bit of help with that. Our culture is very unique. And actually, the culture of 2018 is not what our brains are used to. So, we need quite a few things to change that. So, that's what we did in week 1, was taking those things that our brain needs and applying them to our life. A few simple tweaks, and we get our brain balanced. Week 2 is neurohacking happy, creating those neural pathways, thinking about alpha waves and all of our different types of brain waves, and what we need to increase our happiness or those positive moods in our brain. And it's not just about thinking happy thoughts, it is part of that too, but it's also real life things that we can do to make ourselves happy. So, all these are realistic and practical things that you guys have worked on. Week 3, Time Warrior's Wisdom, is really taking time to a new level, thinking about all the people who have researched using time effectively and who are actually super effective. And that's what went into week 3, being proactive and eliminating those time wasters, eliminating, automating, and delegating all those things that we don't need to do. So that leads us into week 4, which was all about student ownership, is having all the ownership back on the students and how that's actually possible to do. And that involves intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and using the growth mindset, visible learning, and providing a little bit incentives too. So all of those came together for this. So we're going to get started on creating that classroom culture that works for all of these things, for balance, for having student ownership in your classroom. So you're creating a culture that's also balanced too. So without week 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, we wouldn't have exactly the balance we need. So all of them fit together like pieces of a puzzle to create that balanced life. They're all essential. So think about your classroom culture. What is your classroom culture like right now? Do you have a great relationship with your students? Are you consistent and focused? Do you have great rules and procedures, great classroom organization, great classroom management? This is what you need to have that. If you don't already have that, or maybe you have a few tweaks that you need to make, and I'm sure that's probably where you are. You probably have a great classroom management system and you have a great relationship with your students. But we need to think about tweaking everything and making it a lot more balanced. So there's 3 things you need to focus on. It's kind of your quick start guide, and we'll go through each one of these. The first thing is systems. The systems you have in place absolutely determine your success. And those are the rules and procedures you have in place. That's the government of your classroom nation. So I want you to continue to think about your classroom as a nation. This is your country. You have complete control over it, and your rules and procedures are the government that keep it in place. Keep all those things in place. The second thing is your behavior. So if rules and procedures make up the government and constitution of your nation, you're the president, and it's your job to carry out the smooth day-to-day running of your country. That is your job. It's your choices, your behavior that run that nation. And then the third part of that too is your relationship with your students, your relationship with your populace, so to speak. Creating a peaceful nation requires that you develop a relationship of trust and mutual respect. They need to trust that you will be consistent and fair in your decisions. So we're going to go over what each of these looks like. I just wanted to lay them out ahead of time for you. So, culture forming, your systems, rules, a leader, and consistency. So I want you to think of this big picture. This is how we form a culture, okay? So you have a leader, which is you, an attractive character, a leader. Attractive is in not how you look, but why people want to follow you, your students. Then you have rules and procedures in place. Those are your systems, and then consistency with that. So let's look at what that looks like with our systems. The first step, and this is in your success plan that you download, your steps to creating clear classroom rules. These are little tweaks that you probably didn't think about. It didn't occur to you to do these things. So the first thing is you need to create clear classroom rules. And what that means, students need to understand exactly what you expect of them. I'll give you an example. One rule that a lot of teachers have is respect each other. It's too vague. Students are not going to be successful if they don't know exactly what you mean by respecting each other. They are too young to understand what respect means, even all the way up through high school. At that point, they're starting to understand it. But when you're talking about elementary and middle school age children, they don't quite understand the concept of respect, not until they get a little bit older. So you need to be very clear about what that means. In my classroom rules, this translates into using kind words and keeping your hands and your feet to self. So it's very specific. They're going to be successful if you're very specific about that. If you just said you're not respecting the other person, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing because they're not clear on what you expect of them. It's like their home expectations. They might have home expectations that are completely different of what is expected at school, or it's a lot more strict. But you have to be clear in exactly the kind of behavior that you want from them. And mine is using kind words and keeping hands and feet to self. When I have a student who is not nice to another student, that is breaking a classroom rule. And that's how you create the culture of respect and kindness in your classroom. The other one is listen to the teacher. It's too vague. The rule that I have is follow teacher's first request. This one is huge. This is one of those things that basically eliminates a lot of time wastage. Have you ever told your students, or if you have children, to do something? And of course, maybe about 5 people will do it. And then you have to say it again, or you just get louder and you say it again. And then you just get upset about it, right? So the important point here is that if you say, that was my first request, you have all ears perked up when you say that's my first request, because they know at that point that is a classroom rule and they're going to do it right away. A lot of times you need to have your directions on the board too for those people who are just have difficulty hearing, not hearing, but processing what you actually say, because there are students, specifically boys, that's been known their hearing is not quite as good and they have a little bit more of a challenge processing hearing. That's just how their brains work. So keep that in mind. Follow teacher's first request. So making sure you have creating clear classroom rules. Do not have more than 5. They can't handle more than that. So having very specific 5 classroom rules that you have too. So, also, when you have your classroom rules, is that you are implementing consistent consequences. If you look at this image, you notice that consistency is the bottom one right there. You also have integrity, commitment, sincerity, and reliability. Consistency and reliability is what we're going to focus on a lot. In order for your students to trust you and to follow you, you need to be consistent. If you're all over the place with your moods, if you're all over the place with how you implement the consequences of your classroom, breaking of your classroom rules, then they're not going to trust that you're going to be there for them. It's just the way children work. Of course, the same thing is the way humans work anyway. If you're not consistent with how you behave, then they're not going to trust you at all. So, no matter the student, no matter the time of day, no matter your mood, you need to have clear and consistent consequences for breaking of a classroom rule. That is one of the things that I make sure of, even no matter if there are 5 students who are all breaking a classroom rule at once, I'm making sure that I'm consistent. Even if it's a student who doesn't normally break a classroom rule, it has to be consistent. Everyone has to follow the same laws in government that everyone else does, or it's not going to be clear. You're not going to develop that trust. Another thing is that you have to set procedures for everything. It's been known through numerous years of research that children feel more comfortable and at ease if they know what to expect and what you expect of them. I know a lot of people, and I know a lot of teachers in the past have been this way, and I actually was this way when I first started out, is I wanted to be super laid back and super chill, and my kids just to love me, and we were just going to have a great classroom. It was going to be super creative, and it was going to be just, an enjoyable time because I love kids. What I learned though was they need to know what they're expected to do it's the minute they walk in the door. If they're unclear, it causes stress for a lot of them. So the number one problem, as Harry K. Wong says, in the classroom is not discipline, it's the lack of procedures and routines. You have to have a procedure for everything. You have those procedures in place, and when weird, crazy stuff happens, they have those procedures. So in your classroom success plan that you have, is you have a procedure checklist. If you don't already have a procedure for everything, just making sure you do have a procedure for everything. When students have procedures, they know exactly what to do. They're going to be successful and they're going to feel good about being successful. That has to be completely clear. So, some of the things you can have a set procedures for everything is that what do they do when they come in the morning? How do they sharpen pencils? When do they sharpen pencils? Lining up, going to the bathroom, walking in the hallway, turning in their work, center rotations, leaving at the end of the day, coming in from recess, passing out papers. All of those things should have a procedure. Actually, have a lot more procedures than this. Um, just for, I don't let my children talk. So that goes back to during centers. I talked about that at the very beginning of week 1, which talking about our brain needs quiet. It's just one of those simple things that we don't realize that having a procedure for being quiet in my classroom, that is a procedure. So setting procedures for everything. It's not being super organized. It's not being anal. It's setting clear expectations and making sure your students are successful. Now, if you don't know about Harry K. Wong, I highly recommend any readings that you can do of him. The greatest book that he has written is The First Days of School, and it's about what to do those first 6 weeks of school, how to create this classroom culture, and basically, it's talking about how uh, the students are the ones who are doing all the work, and you're the ones who you can just sit back. Like if you're doing all the work, then you're going to be the unhappy one. It's basically what I also promote too. So he has done all kinds of talks. He's been super successful because he learned through trial and error what's the best way to do things in the classroom. So I highly recommend anything by Harry K. Wong. So I want to move into thinking about your behavior in response to your students in response to classroom rules and your systems that you have in place. Huge time waster in your classroom. We'll talk about time wasters in just a minute when you have these classroom rules and procedures. There's lots of ways that we waste time that we don't even realize that we do. Your behavior sets the classroom climate. When you have a student, which you'll always have at least one, and you know who they are, that want to argue with you if you implement a consequence. So what I do in my classroom for a consequence, I'll give that example, is that I have a stop sign that says, think about your behavior and bring this to me after class and tell me a different choice that you're going to make. So it's a red stop sign that has the words on it to think about your choices, and it's laminated, and I give that out. And I don't ever say anything. It just, they know it's 5 minutes off recess when they get one of those, and it usually makes lots of corrections in behavior. So usually I'll have one or two students who will argue with me, and they only do it at the beginning of the year because they realize at some point that I'm not going to argue with you. They'll want to defend themselves. They'll want to offer excuses. So here's the rule. You need to remain firm and proactive with arguments because it's a time waster. It gets you off task. Your whole class can get derailed from this too. Is do not, under any circumstances, enter into an argument with a student while you're in class. You can calmly say, I'm not going to argue, and move on. If they continue, let them know you're going to talk about it after class. You can listen to it, listen to their discussion after class, but if they broke a classroom rule, they broke a classroom rule. So you have to be fair, but you also have to be consistent. I have actually given stop signs out, but I wasn't clear what was going on, and they really didn't break a classroom rule. It's just what I saw. I didn't have the whole picture. And they're very respectful about telling me if they didn't really break a classroom rule. So I will talk to them. They know that I'm fair on that too. But I don't have very many arguments anymore because of that. Now here's what I do. So here's a perfect example. When a student gets a stop sign and they immediately want to, I didn't do anything. I wasn't talking. Whatever. You just say, we can talk about it later. But I didn't do anything. I am not arguing with you. You broke a classroom rule. If they continue to argue, then you're just going to walk away. And if they continue to argue, you're just going to have them step outside for a few minutes. They can come back in. This actually works with any student in the school. If you are having to correct another student in the hallway, I get this a lot. When I do hallway duty, and we have different rules in different schools and everything else, but hallway duty is basically where we have students who are sitting outside of our classrooms early in the morning hours before they're allowed to go into their classroom. And we have the rule in our school that they have to remain quiet and to read or do some kind of work in the morning to ensure academic success. So my job 4 times a year is to have a whole week where I'm trying to keep everyone quiet in our hallway, walking up and down the hallway. Inevitably, there will be children talking. Now, I don't usually just say shh, because that doesn't work. Sometimes I do, and that works. But what happens is I'll say, you need to get a book out, you need to be reading, we're not talking right now. And what usually happens is, because they don't know me very well, they will look at me, and then I walk away, or they pretend like to get a book out, and I come back and they're still talking. And what I'll do at that point is line, or you need to do this or that. And I usually get an argument at that point from someone, but I wasn't doing anything. I had a book out. And I'm not arguing with you. I'm not a discussion. And so they do it. Or I count. You need to be moving it in line by the time I count to 3. So actually counting helps students a lot too. I do countdowns quite frequently to have all the students in their seats or in line or anything else. But the big thing is, don't argue with them. You just need to be calm about it. Say, I'm not going to argue. Or if you tell them to do something and they don't want to do it, this can be your children or the students. Just say, I'm not um, asking a question. I'm telling you to do it right now. Go ahead and do it. So, arguing is a big time waster. Another one, again, is remain consistent, right? Remain proactive in how you do things in your classroom. If you have a procedure for something, make sure you follow that procedure. If students aren't following the procedure, make sure there's consequences for that. One of my classroom rules is to follow procedures. So if they are not following procedures, they get a stop sign, they get time off for recess. So I don't do that at the beginning of the year. I give them a few weeks to learn the procedure to make sure they're successful. I model it for them and then they do it. I show them non examples and examples of the behavior that I expect of them. Also, when we get back from long breaks, I'll also kind of reintroduce and practice procedures and rules and model examples and non examples of what that looks like. So they're always clear of what I want. At, Therefore, they know there's consistency in that too. But you have to remain consistent too. You have to remain proactive in your procedures. If you let it go just a little bit, because I know we have a tendency to do that, and I find myself doing that sometimes, and I have to buck it back up and be consistent because you're kind of you want to lay back a little bit. You want to get a little bit laid back at the end of the day or on a Friday, but you have to pull back up and do it. Keep on doing it and being consistent with your consequences. Everything that you do, being proactive means you're remaining consistent. Okay, so in your download, you have a stop doing list. So it's identifying time wasters you have in your classroom. It's like another stop doing list. It's another identifying your time wasters. One of the things that occurs quite frequently in our classroom is that when we have challenges with we have a whole like say 5 children are being basically having inconsistent behavior. There's some kind of challenge with them. They're talking too much or something's going on that it feels like more than just one individual. And you feel like the need, or there's like several people talking in the hallway, and you want to have a class discussion. You want to get onto the whole class about this. This is a huge time waster, and it takes away from your teaching. It takes away from their trust in you. It just takes away from so many things. One of the most successful strategies that teachers use is dealing with individuals and not the whole class. Because what you'll usually find is out of 25 students, it's not any more than 5 that are exhibiting that behavior that you want to talk about. The other 20 are just listening to you go, wah, 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 wah. Just like in that picture, this is what happens. Okay. And I hear it from students complaining about other teachers. You don't want to be one of those teachers at all. So, this is how you do it when you're dealing with individuals, whether they're breaking classroom rules, that you just have a few students, or it's just random questions or they're missing work. I'm going to walk through a few examples of what that looks like when you are dealing with individuals. So, let's say that you have a rule to remain quiet during a specific time. And you have not just one, but you have several people talking. And the natural inclination is to say, class, class, or boys and girls, we need not to be talking right now. And they start talking again. So you just you start yelling at them or have a big class discussion about being quiet and respect or anything of that nature. You need to go deal with those students individually, whether it's 1 or 8. You have your consequences, which are again my stop sign. It's a super silent way of doing it. Deliver your stop signs or whatever you want to do that's a consequence. And I do suggest using some kind of nonverbal cue where you're not having to talk of each individual student that you have to. So you give them their stop sign and you go to those specific people and the behavior stops and you're not wasting all of your time on those those few kids that you have for the whole classroom. Okay, so don't give a whole lecture to your entire class for the behavior of few. You might also have random questions that occur during your whole group that either have nothing to do with what you're teaching, like when are we going on our field trip? And you just decide to answer then. Huge time waster. Or a question that has nothing to do with what you were doing at that point. One of the things that I find a huge time waster I discovered was at the end of whole group, and I'm starting centers, and I will model what they're doing in centers if it's something new, and then I have people ask questions sometimes, like what they get. Some students get really unclear about things. They're like, "Well, what do we do this? What do this?" And I have instructions on the board too, so I'll just point to the board. But instead of answering those three questions at the end of a lesson, for the whole class is just sitting there, the majority of the class understands what we're doing, and then three kids have questions, you go to those students individually and answer those questions. So it's at any time during a lesson where there are questions that only a few students have that everybody else is ready to move on, don't stop the whole class for those few questions. Just move to those few students who have their hand raised, and you can address those individuals, and everybody else can move on. And they're not just waiting for you. It's a huge time waster. It's just one of those ways to get things quicker. Another one is missing work. So if you have students who are, say you have 5 students missing work, instead of saying to the whole class who's not turned theirs in, or you chase those individual students down, you just put the names or the numbers. I have student numbers on the board of who's missing their work. It's a very clear indication, and that's a classroom job too. So thinking about individual behaviors, random questions, missing work, all of those things too. So avoiding those time wasters of addressing the whole class, or just when students ask questions and you go off on a tangent on something else, everybody else needs to be moving on with what you're doing instead of answering those few questions of the individuals that you have too. So avoid whole class discussions, deal with the individuals so you're not one of those teachers that's wah, 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 wah. That's huge. All right. Okay, so what you're going to do in your classroom guide is identify your time wasters. Be reflective in thinking about your behavior. What do you do? Do you yell at the class for talking? Your alternative would be to give out consequences like stop signs or pull clips, whatever you do. You answer questions with your class when you can answer questions individually. That's another avoidance of a time waster. Asking who's done. That is something I see quite a bit with teachers. It's like, okay, who's finished? When what you're really trying to determine is how much time you need to give everybody. And so ask fist to 5 how much time they need and kind of do an average. So I say fist to 5 how much time you need, and I'll have anywhere from 0 to 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then I give it a little bit in between. And the students who are finished, I usually give them something. If you're finished, go ahead and think of a third detail that goes with your main idea. If you're finished, answer the reflection question. If you're finished, you can start on your center work. The other thing, again, is if thinking about a time waster, do you lecture your whole class a lot? Talk to groups or individuals. I'm going to give a very specific example that happened to me this past week. I'm a kind teacher, and my students know it, but I'm also consistent. I had this past week, I have probably 3 really high boys. They're like highs and advanced students, but they're also super active, super active. And what happens with them is that because I'm kind, they do take advantage of that, where they will just get hyper in unclear conditions. Like if there's something that's different, they'll get hyper and just run or jump and hit the doorway, things like that, very odd things like that. That happened this past week where we went to go have our pictures made, and I had 3 or 4 boys who went nuts bonkers, and they're good kids. So instead of, it looked like my whole class. I looked at my whole class and it looked like they were all going bonkers. But then when I really looked at it, was just like 3 or 4 boys who were doing it. So instead of lecturing my whole class about what you should do when you go get your pictures made or in an assembly or anything like that, I talked to these specific boys. I had to think about who was it? I had to observe my class and see who it was. So that's kind of something you might have to do is if you notice your class is being really loud or misbehaving or something is going on that is not what your expectations are, take a look and see who it is. Don't interrupt your whole class for all of them. Identify who they are. Usually, sometimes I'm in my small group and I see some students do it. I'll write those names down and then I'll have those students come to me individually or I'll go see them individually. And you kind of have to see who it is. And those boys that did that, I pulled them out to the hallway and I had a consequence to them. And I also had a conversation with them too about being disappointed in their behavior. And just because I'm kind doesn't mean I'm going to let them do things that are below expectations. And I didn't give them a big long lecture because big long lectures really don't work because after the first few minutes, students aren't listening to you anyway. So you have to have those consequences. That being said, when you're talking to individuals, really shout out when they do something well. When you have any students who you have to have consistent, you're always giving consequences to, make sure you sandwich it to make sure that you build that relationship. You're not always the one who's giving out the stop signs or the consequence or taking away recess, but you're building that relationship too. You're complimenting the things they do well. So making sure you're continuing to give out those compliments and feedback that are positive so you can kind of sandwich that, and that's going to lead us into relationships. It's building those relationships with students because if you have a relationship with them, all these other things are going to fall into place with them. That's going to provide that balance you need. So you have your individual balance, but then you have your balance with your students too. If they don't trust you and respect you and really love you, then a lot of these things aren't going to happen. You have to have that relationship with them for everything to happen. So being consistent is huge. So with teacher-student relationships, so if you look at this graphic organizer or this image, basically, teacher-student relationships growth is high, super, super high. So having that relationship, it's not just the relationship, it's the fact that your students will work hard for you if they respect you and they trust you. So being consistent creates that trust that you need for them to work hard and to do what's needed. So one of the other things too is you're going to be consistent, but also be fair. Listen to them, let them know figure out what's going on in their lives. So being fair to them, treat them as if they are grown-ups. This is one of the things that I see with that non-teachers, a lot of non-teachers are like, and quite a few teachers are, is seeing students as fully formed human beings. Children are human beings first. They're not less than we are just because they're younger and their brains aren't fully developed. We have to make a lot of the decisions because their brains are not fully developed. They're not. They can't make the best choices in a lot of situations because their brains are not fully developed. We have to know that about them. However, we're not going to be disrespectful because they're younger. We need to be respectful of them and be fair to them. Another thing to think about for building those relationships is listening to them. Develop that mutual trust, listening to your students and knowing them, that builds that relationship, trust, and you learn, and the students will too. So you learn about what their likes, their dislikes, what's going to motivate them, what's not going to motivate them. So truly listening to them is going to build that relationship too. Another huge thing is be positive with them. Don't always be the consequence person. Again, is really compliment them if they're doing things well. That's huge. Having that extrinsic motivation. We talked about doing a group and individual rewards, making sure you're giving those compliments too. So here's some relationship hacking tips. You can actually use this with anybody, not just your students. So be consistent, remain true to your rules and procedures, and be proactive. Avoid being reactive. Don't yell. There is no reason ever for a teacher to yell. And we'll go through an example of this too. Be fair. Treat students with respect and be fair in your decisions. It's going to go a long way and create a great classroom culture. And listen, take the time to listen to your students. It gets you to know their interest and background, and it helps you to be fair too, so you know what's going on with them too. It's going to help you love them a whole lot too. So once you get to know them, that provides you that balance. So you want to be a better teacher for them too, and you are more balanced. So I'll give you a little story, an example of this. The other day, I was sitting in my classroom, and I could hear a teacher yelling in the hallway, screaming at these students. In our school, we have these students who sit in the hallway after school. They're waiting for something, and we have different teachers who rotate that duty to sit with these students. Well, again, a class school rule is that we have the students are quiet, and it's challenging to have students be quiet after school, no doubt, just like hallway duty. So what happens is the students start talking a little bit. You have one or two start talking, and then you have multiple ones start talking, and so you have quite a few students talking. And this teacher was screaming at these students. Like, she was so unhappily, angrily. She was like, she's usually a very happy teacher. I see her all the time smiling. But this, she was like screaming, getting so frustrated with them because they wouldn't stop talking. And this happened. She yelled at them probably 5 times in the matter of 10 minutes. You could tell she was very angry and frustrated. So she was not happy. Now, how I would have dealt with the situation where I have a whole group of students like this, because yelling is the number one ineffective thing you can do with students. They're not going to listen to you. You can yell once if you don't yell very often. If you yell once, a lot of times that will get their attention, because I don't yell very often. Sometimes I will speak a little bit louder and that gets their attention a lot. I don't ever yell at my students. So a way she could have handled this was, when the students start talking, you identify those few and you go to them individually and you separate them. If they don't start talking then you just have, they sit, they're shunned. You use that scapegoat. Everybody else sees they're sitting by themselves and they're shamed. Nobody else is going to talk. But if it gets way out of control, then you have like half the students in the hallway or half students in your class talking. You do a little countdown. Okay, boys and girls, I'm going to count down from 5, or I'm going to count to 3, and all voices need to be off. If your voices are not off, then this will be happening. So, say you count to 3, and all of a sudden, voices stop. Your consequence has to be clear. Then that person's going to be, if you talk, you're going to be separated from everybody else. Or if you talk, I'm going to do this. Whatever you think that a good consequence will be. If you talk, you're going to miss 5 minutes off of recess. Tomorrow, I'll let your teacher know. And so you have a good consequence. And the next person who talks, if they don't believe you, then that person will get that consequence. And you go ahead and write them down. Okay, you're missing 5 minutes off of recess tomorrow. So letting them know there's a clear consequence. Okay, I'm going to count to 3. All voices need to be off. If you do talk, you get this consequence. Yelling at them at the top of your lungs and getting frustrated only makes you unhappy and is super ineffective. And they will not trust you if you're yelling at them. I'll give you 2 specific things to note too. I have quite a few students who will talk to me about other teachers and how the yelling of other teachers, they hate going to that classroom because their teacher last year yelled at them, or their homeroom teacher yells at them all the time. My son talks to me too. He doesn't like his homeroom teacher because she's very mean and yells, even though he's super well behaved. So he sees her as a very fearful person. Like, he's afraid of her and sees her as super unhappy. So he avoids her at all costs. Nobody wants to be that teacher. I know if you're in this course, you're not the teacher who yells and gets super mad anyway, but maybe you do. You have your bad days. Everybody does. If you've gone through week 1 through 4, then you're not going to have these bad days. But if you do, let's say you didn't have a chance to do all the things you need to get done, you didn't have enough sleep for the things you do, stop yourself from yelling, count to 10, and think of a better choice. Be observant, be proactive. Look at those 3 students who are doing all the talking and count for them. Okay, I'm going to count to 3, and all voices need to be off by the time I count to 3 if you haven't quit talking. So be consistent. No need to yell. Okay, that's going to be huge when you develop those relationships. So, as a review, developing a wonderful, beautiful classroom culture so you can have all this balance that you need. Have system in place. If you are in the middle of the school year, you can always adopt new rules and practice them. You can always do any of these things. The clear thing is you're modeling for them, showing examples and non-examples. You can anytime during the year you can put a rule and a procedure in place as long as they are clear of what it is. You can't just say it once and expect it has to be written, modeled repeatedly until it's in place. So have your rules and procedure. It's the government, it's the constitution of your classroom. Your behavior too. Be consistent with it. It makes up your government. You're the president. Remember, you are in control. It's your job day to day to carry out the smooth running of your classroom and those rules and procedures. And then developing in the relationship with your students, create the peaceful nation, develop trust and mutual respect because you are the leader they want you to be. You're already there, and I know you're going to be super successful with anything. So, what you kind of learned in all this was just like there's a few tweaks that you may do you don't even realize you do that waste time, but also wear away at the relationship with your students and not creating that ideal classroom culture and success of that too. So let's kind of wrap it up and think about where we've been with this entire 5 weeks that we've gone through everything. It's a wrap. This is the end of it. Isn't that exciting? So, the very first part of the course, we were talking about balance and happiness, using supplements, open focus exercises to organize our brain differently, to exercise our brain, using movement to implement the right side of our brain, just like creativity kind of moves everything to the right side. And then thinking about brain waves too, really putting forth those alpha brain waves so our brain has a little bit more balance. We're not always using one type of brainwave, having that more balance. So we are balanced and happy. Our brains are a vehicle, they are a machine that we control instead of our brains controlling us. And we should make sure that it has exactly what it needs. Time and decision warriors, using your knowledge to implement proactive strategies with decision making, systems, and plans. That was week 3 and 4. Finally, there's creating your nation, using everything you've learned to create your perfect nation with you as the president and thinking of you as the leader of your life. In your download, you have some reflection tools to help you write out what your vision is for your classroom now. So you'll have some time to think about everything that you've learned and how you want to implement things in your classroom, creating a vision for yourself. There's written, and if you want to do images too, like a vision board. So all those things are some reflection tools to help guide you along the way too, and to wrap everything up and to see where you want to be. And think about your purpose, your vision, your goals to being part of this culture that we are creating ourselves as part of the way. We're teachers all across the nation, all across the world that are doing this, that we're creating something that's different and unique. It's something that nobody else has done before, that we're creating extraordinary teacher lives. It's incredible what we're doing. So I want you to keep that in mind, to write your purpose, your vision, your goals. That's what your job is at the end of this. So think of everything that's going to make you successful for your classroom. Thinking about everything that you need. This is our manifesto. I don't want you to remember who you are. We are that new breed of teachers. Obviously, we're smart. We're happy. We don't rely on the old school way of doing things. We're not going to burn ourselves out. We're going to do the opposite. We're that powerful light, renewable energy. We have clarity and vision. We're not going to be the ones who have self sacrifice. We're moving against the tide of those traditional beliefs. We have to do things differently. We have to do things smarter. It's not a shortcut. It's the only way that's going to work in all classrooms, all cultures, all teachers' lives. We don't request permission, and we don't have a support system of traditional methods. We are our own support system. We have to do it right to show others the way to freedom, balance, and impact. In essence, we define our own destiny. We create our own lives. We build visions, and we change the world. We're the way. The way teachers are motivated, knowing they are the future of teaching. And we, my dears, are the future of teaching. So I want to take this moment to thank you for being part of this course, being part of the way. You've just learned everything you need to be part of the way movement, to share with others, to show others exactly what it takes to be happy in teaching, to be balanced and whole. That way you can take care of your sacred beings that you have for future generations, and you can show other teachers how to take care of theirs too. So imagine the way with hundreds of thousands of teachers' lives affected, and how many students are impacted by all of those happy teachers. Can you imagine that? That movement of happiness in extraordinary teacher lives? It's huge. It really is. So we're beginning that. You're part of that. You're part of the way. So thank you for being here. Thank you for going through all the changes you've gone through. Changes can be difficult, but you are at the very end of the program, and I'm so excited to be part of that. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions, if you want to say anything, you want to keep the conversation going, please email me. We do have a private Facebook group. If you haven't joined the private Facebook group, just let me know, email me. That way you can be part of it too. So that's the way. It's a private Facebook group. So email me if you have any questions, and I wish you luck in your journey and your road on the way. Bye bye.